The hum of the central AC was the only sound in our house in Austin, a constant, low-frequency vibration that usually lulled me to sleep. But tonight, it felt like a serrated blade cutting through the heavy silence of the master bedroom. It was 2:04 a.m. My eyes were locked on the digital clock on the nightstand, the red numbers bleeding into the darkness like a warning sign I had ignored for years. Beside me, Maren was breathing deeply, the rhythmic rise and fall of her silk-covered shoulders suggesting a peace she didn't deserve. Then, the vibration started. Not the AC, but a frantic, muffled buzzing coming from the depths of her nightstand drawer. I should have stayed in bed. I should have turned over and let the silence reclaim the room. But curiosity is a cruel master. I slid out from under the heavy duvet, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor, and opened the drawer. Her secondary phone, a sleek, black device I didn't recognize, was glowing. The name on the screen didn't say Thatcher. It was saved simply as a period, just a dot, a tiny, insignificant speck that was currently shattering my life. I picked it up, my thumb trembling as I swiped the screen. I didn't even have to say hello. "Are you still awake, beautiful?" The voice was rich, smooth, and dripping with an arrogance that made my stomach turn. It was Thatcher. I knew that voice. Everyone in Austin knew that voice. He was the man on the billboards, the one promising a brighter future for our city. He sounded like he was smiling, like he owned the air he was breathing. I stayed silent, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard a rustle of sheets behind me. Maren sat up, her eyes wide, reflecting the faint blue light of the phone in my hand. For a second, just one heartbeat of time, I saw terror in her eyes. But then, as she realized I hadn't spoken, the terror dissolved into something far worse. Contempt. She reached out and plucked the phone from my hand with a chilling calmness. She didn't apologize. She didn't scramble for an excuse. She looked me straight in the face, her expression as blank as a fresh grave, and spoke into the receiver. "He's too stupid to notice, Thatcher. Go back to sleep. I'll see you at the office." She ended the call and tossed the phone back into the drawer. The click of the wood on wood sounded like a gavel bringing a trial to order. She laid back down, pulled the covers up to her chin, and closed her eyes. Just like that. In her mind, I was already a ghost. I was a fixture of the house, like a lamp or a rug, something useful, but ultimately beneath her notice. Have you ever felt your entire world turn into a lie in 3 seconds? Have you ever looked at the person who promised to grow old with you and realized you were sleeping next to a stranger who viewed you as a backup plan? If you've ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong, but convinced yourself you were just being insecure, drop a yes in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who stayed quiet when I should have screamed. And if you want to know how a stupid man dismantles a kingdom built on lies, make sure you're subscribed. This isn't just a story about a broken heart. It's a blueprint for a reckoning. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands in the dark. These were the hands of a jeweler. I spent my days hunched over a workbench, peering through a jeweler's loupe at the microscopic imperfections in diamonds and gold. I knew how to spot a feather, a tiny internal crack that could cause a stone to shatter if struck at the wrong angle. I had spent 15 years looking for flaws in gemstones, yet I had been blind to the massive, jagged fissure running right through the center of my marriage. Maren thought I was slow because I was quiet. She thought my patience was a lack of ambition. In the high-stakes world of venture capital where she spent her days, silence is seen as a weakness. In my world, silence is where the real work happens. We had met in our early 20s, back when we were both scraping by. I was an apprentice, covered in polishing rouge and silver dust, and she was an intern with a fire in her eyes that I mistook for passion for our future. We built this life together, or so I thought. We moved to Austin when the tech boom started, buying a fixer-upper in a neighborhood that eventually became the most expensive zip code in the state. I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for her MBA. I restored the crown molding by hand. I planted the Japanese maples in the backyard that she now took credit for during her garden parties. As she climbed the corporate ladder at her fund, the we slowly became an I. Her stories about work stopped being about the challenges and started being about the power. Then came Thatcher. He was one of their major investors, a man who used his wealth to buy influence and his influence to buy people. I remembered the first time I met him at a gala. He had shaken my hand, looking over my shoulder the entire time, his grip limp and dismissive. He had called me the artisan, a title that felt like a pat on the head. Maren had laughed, a high, sharp sound I didn't recognize. I should have known then. The signs were all there, like inclusions in a low-grade ruby. The gym clothes she started wearing that were far too expensive for a morning jog. The way she started locking her iPad and taking calls in the garage with the engine running. The way she stopped asking me about my day, her eyes glazing over whenever I talked about a particularly difficult restoration I was working on. I had excused it all. I told myself she was under pressure. I told myself that successful women in her field had to be tough. I was the stable one, the anchor. But standing in the dark of our room, I realized an anchor is just something that stays stuck in the mud while the ship sails away. I didn't go back to sleep. I walked downstairs to my small home studio, a room filled with the scent of sulfur and old metal. I sat at my bench and turned on the small LED task light. The circle of white light illuminated my tools, the fine-tipped pliers, the ultrasonic cleaner, the precision saws. Maren thought I was a simple craftsman. She saw a man who fixed broken watches and resized rings. She didn't realize that a jeweler's greatest skill isn't just fixing things. It's the ability to take something apart without damaging the components. I opened my laptop and looked at our joint accounts. I was the one who managed the household finances, a task Maren had happily handed off years ago because it was tedious. As I scrolled through the digital ledgers, the stupidity she accused me of started to feel like a heavy, cold weight in my chest. There were transfers I didn't recognize, small amounts at first, then larger ones, moved into an LLC I'd never heard of. It was a classic move, one she probably learned from Thatcher's playbooks. She wasn't just leaving me, she was stripping the house of its value before she walked out the door. She was treating our life like a distressed asset that needed to be liquidated. I felt a surge of heat crawl up my neck, a raw, primitive rage that whispered for me to go back upstairs, drag her out of bed, and demand the truth. I wanted to see her face when I showed her the bank statements. I wanted to hear her try to explain away the dot in her phone. But then I remembered the way she said it. He's too stupid to notice. That sentence was a gift. It was the ultimate cover. If she believed I was a fool, she would be careless. She would leave the trail wide open because she didn't think I was capable of following it. I took a deep breath, the smell of the studio grounding me. I needed a plan, something as precise and unbreakable as a platinum setting. I couldn't just leave. If I left now, I'd lose the house, the business, and the dignity I had spent a lifetime building. I had to let her keep playing her game. I had to become the man she thought I was, the oblivious, hard-working husband who was just happy to be in her orbit. I would be the artisan she mocked, but instead of restoring a watch, I was going to restore my life by dismantling hers. I began to make a list, not of her crimes, but of my assets. My friend Greer was the first person I thought of. We had grown up together, but while I went into the world of tangible beauty, Greer went into the world of invisible signals. He worked in high-end residential security, the kind of systems used by people who had things worth stealing. He knew how to hide a camera in a smoke detector and how to clone a SIM card without touching the phone. I needed to see what they were doing when they thought I was too stupid to look. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the lawn I had mowed just 2 days ago, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She was already dressed for her morning run, her Lululemon leggings crisp, and her hair pulled back into a tight, professional ponytail. She walked into the kitchen and started the espresso machine, the hiss of steam filling the house. I stayed in my studio, watching her through the cracked door. She looked perfectly normal. She looked like the woman I had loved for 15 years. But as she checked her phone, the dot phone, a small, triumphant smile played on her lips. She didn't even look toward the studio. She didn't check to see if I was okay after the encounter in the bedroom. She simply grabbed her water bottle and headed for the front door. The sound of the deadbolt clicking shut behind her echoed through the hallway. I stood up and walked to the window, watching her jog down the driveway until she disappeared around the corner. The mask was on. The game had officially started. My hands weren't trembling anymore. I reached for a piece of charcoal and a fresh sheet of drafting paper on my bench, and instead of a ring design, I began to sketch the first phase of a structural collapse. I spent the next 3 hours in a state of hyperfocus I hadn't felt in years. It was the same feeling I got when I was setting a particularly fragile emerald, a stone so prone to cracking that one wrong move meant disaster. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was an engineer. I went through our tax returns from the last 3 years, looking for the discrepancies Maren thought were hidden beneath layers of corporate jargon. She was clever. I'll give her that. She had used her position at the fund to create a network of consulting fees that eventually funneled back into her private LLC. She was building a nest egg using the company's money and our shared credit, ensuring that when the divorce happened, she'd walk away with millions, while I'd be left with a mortgage on a house I could no longer afford. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had used our home office printer to scan some of the original incorporation documents for her LLC. Our printer had an internal hard drive, a feature I had installed myself for efficiency. Every document she had scanned, every contract she had signed in secret, was sitting right there in the cache, waiting for someone stupid enough to find it. I began to download the files one by one, my eyes scanning the signatures. There it was, her name next to Thatcher's. They weren't just lovers. They were partners in a scheme that would likely get them barred from the financial industry if it ever saw the light of day. The sheer scale of the betrayal was breathtaking. It wasn't just a physical affair. It was a total assassination of our shared history. She was willing to destroy my financial future just to give Thatcher a slightly larger piece of the pie. Why? Was it the power? Was she so bored with our simple life that she needed the adrenaline of a white-collar crime to feel alive? Or did she truly hate me that much? I looked at a photo on my desk, a picture of us from 5 years ago, standing on a beach in Maui. We looked so happy. Or maybe I was just the only one who was actually there. I closed the laptop when I heard her car pull back into the driveway. I needed to be the stupid husband again. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of the now cold coffee, and waited. When she walked through the door, she was glowing from her run, a light sweat on her brow. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of the man who had held her phone at 2 a.m. I made sure my expression was one of tired confusion. I let my shoulders slump. I made myself small. "You're up early," she said, her voice casual, as if she hadn't insulted my entire existence a few hours ago. "Couldn't sleep," I mumbled, staring into my mug. "That phone call. I didn't recognize the number. Was everything okay with work?" She let out a short, dismissive laugh as she headed for the shower. "Just a client, Holden, a very demanding one. You wouldn't understand the pressure we're under right now. Just don't touch my things, okay?" It creates more problems than it solves. Right, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I wouldn't want to create any problems. As she walked away, the sound of her expensive sneakers clicking on the tile felt like a countdown. I waited until I heard the shower start upstairs, the water drumming against the porcelain. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out my work bag. I needed to get to the shop. I needed to be surrounded by the things I understood. But before I left, I stopped at the small mirror by the door. I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. His eyes were harder, colder. The artisan was gone. The stupid husband was a mask. Underneath, something else was forming. Something sharp and indestructible. I drove through the streets of Austin, the morning traffic a blur of colors and sounds. I passed one of Thatcher's campaign posters. He looked so confident, so untouchable. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. People like Thatcher and Maren think they are the ones who run the world because they are the ones who make the most noise. They think they are the hunters, and people like me are the prey. They forget that the most dangerous part of a trap isn't the bait. It's the mechanism that sits perfectly still, waiting for the exact moment to snap shut. I pulled up to my shop, the Gilded Loop, a small, discreet storefront in a historic building downtown. I unlocked the heavy security gate and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and polishing wax. I walked to the back, to my heavy steel safe, and dialed the combination. Inside, hidden behind the trays of repair work and loose stones, was a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside was a raw, uncut diamond I had bought years ago as an investment. It was ugly to the untrained eye, a dull, gray pebble that looked like nothing more than a piece of gravel. But I knew what was inside. I knew that with enough pressure and the right cuts, it would become something that could cut through glass. I sat at my bench and picked up my loupe, pressing it to my eye. I held the uncut stone in the light, turning it slowly. I wasn't looking at the diamond anymore. I was looking at the structure of the next few months. I needed to see Greer. I needed to secure the house. And most importantly, I needed to make sure that Maren and Thatcher continued to believe their own lie. I needed them to stay arrogant. I needed them to keep laughing at me behind my back. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Greer's name. My thumb hovered over the call button. This was the point of no return. Once I made this call, there was no going back to the stupid husband. There was no going back to the man who believed in the we. I felt a fleeting moment of grief for that man, a brief pang of sorrow for the life I thought I had. But then I remembered the whisper in the dark. He's too stupid to notice. I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear, listening to the long, steady rings as I watched the morning sun hit the dusty workbench. The line rang 3 times before a voice as gravelly as a Texas back road picked up. Greer didn't say hello. He just exhaled a cloud of smoke that I could almost smell through the receiver. He knew that if I was calling him at this hour on a Tuesday, the world wasn't spinning on its axis anymore. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him I needed the full sweep, not for a client, but for the sanctuary I thought I had built at home. There was a pause, a heavy silence where the gravity of my request settled between us, and then he gave me an address to a coffee shop in East Austin that didn't appear on any tourist maps. Driving there felt like navigating a dreamscape. The familiar streets of Austin looked different through the lens of betrayal. Every luxury SUV looked like it was carrying a secret. Every glass-fronted office building looked like a cage. I kept seeing Maren's triumphant smile in the rearview mirror, a ghost haunting the passenger seat. When I walked into the shop, Greer was tucked into a corner booth, a laptop open and a collection of small, unrecognizable plastic components scattered on the table. He looked up, his eyes scanning my face with the clinical precision of a man who dealt in vulnerabilities. "You look like you've seen the end of the world, Holden," he said. sliding a lukewarm black coffee toward me. "I heard the end of it," I replied, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I heard it in a whisper at 2 in the morning. I laid it out for him, not the heartbreak, but the mechanics. I told him about the secondary phone, the transfers to the unknown LLC, and the involvement of a man whose face was plastered on every second bus stop in the city. Greer didn't flinch at Thatcher's name. In his line of work, the higher the pedestal, the filthier the boots. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a frequency that wouldn't carry past our table. He explained that if Maren was as careful as I described, she wouldn't be using the home Wi-Fi for anything incriminating. She'd be using an encrypted hotspot or a dedicated cellular line. To catch her, I didn't need to break into her phone. I needed to shadow her digital footprint in the physical world. He handed me a small magnetic device no larger than a coin. It was a high-frequency GPS tracker with a built-in microphone that activated only when it detected speech above a certain decibel. "Put this under the rear bumper of her car, not inside. She'll see it." "And this," he held up a USB drive that looked like a common thumb drive, "is for that printer cache you mentioned. It'll mirror every packet of data that has passed through that hard drive in the last 6 months and dump it into a cloud folder I've set up for you." As I took the tools of my new shadowed life, a question burned in the back of my throat. Why do people do it, Greer? Why build something for 15 years just to set it on fire? Greer packed his laptop away, his expression grim. "Some people don't see a marriage as a building, Holden. They see it as a ladder. Once they've climbed high enough to reach the next floor, they don't care if the ladder falls. They expect it to." I headed back to the shop, the weight of the tracker in my pocket feeling like a loaded gun. I spent the afternoon going through the motions, resizing a wedding band for a young man who looked so nauseatingly hopeful that I had to look away. Every time I hit the gold with my mallet, I imagined I was striking the foundation of the life Maren and Thatcher were trying to steal from me. The anger was there, but it was being refined, tempered by the discipline of my craft. I wasn't going to be the victim. I was going to be the auditor. When I returned home that evening, the house was draped in the golden, deceptive light of a Texas sunset. Maren was already in the kitchen, pouring a glass of an expensive Chardonnay I didn't remember buying. She looked radiant, her skin glowing from a facial, or perhaps just the adrenaline of a successful lie. She looked at me and smiled, the same smile she used on investors. "You're late, honey," she said, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound concerned rather than annoyed. "I was thinking we could order from that new sushi place in South Lamar. Celebrate a little." "Celebrate what?" I asked, hanging my coat and feeling the cold plastic of the tracker against my leg. "Oh, just a big win at the fund. Thatcher, the primary investor group, approved the new project I've been pitching. It's going to put us in a completely different bracket, Holden. Everything is about to change." I felt a chill run down my spine. Everything is about to change. She was telling me the truth, just not the version she thought I was hearing. She was talking about her exit strategy. She was talking about the moment she would cut the cord and watch me drift into the abyss. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face protesting the effort. "That's amazing, Maren. You've worked so hard for this. You deserve everything that's coming to you." She laughed, a light, melodic sound that used to be my favorite thing in the world. Now, it sounded like glass breaking. "We deserve it," she corrected, stepping closer and resting her hand on my chest. I could feel the heat of her palm through my shirt, and it took every ounce of my will not to flinch. I had to stay the stupid husband. I had to let her believe the anchor was still firmly lodged in the mud. That night, after the sushi was eaten and the wine was finished, I waited for the house to settle into that familiar, suffocating silence. I watched the red numbers of the clock, 11:30 p.m., 12:15 a.m., 1 a.m. When Maren's breathing became heavy and rhythmic, I crept out of bed. I didn't take my phone. I didn't turn on a single light. I navigated the house by memory, a ghost moving through a museum of his own dead dreams. I slipped out into the garage, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and expensive leather. Her car sat there, a white beast that whispered of status and speed. I knelt behind the rear bumper, my fingers searching for a flat, metallic surface. With a soft clack, the tracker found its home. It felt like an act of war. I moved to the home office next. The printer sat in the corner, a bulky, professional-grade machine that Maren used for confidential work. I plugged Greer's USB drive into the maintenance port at the back. A tiny blue light began to flicker, a silent heartbeat in the dark. Data transferring. I stood there in the shadows, watching the light, thinking about all the times I had sat in this room dreaming about our future. I thought about the kids we talked about having, but never had time for. I realize now that Maren never wanted a family with me. She wanted a placeholder until she could find someone who matched her ambition. The drive finished its work with a final steady glow. I tucked it into my pocket and erased the maintenance log on the printer's screen, just as Greer had instructed. As I turned to leave, my foot caught on the edge of the rug, and I stumbled, my hand hitting the desk to steady myself. A stack of folders slid to the floor, spilling their contents across the hardwood. I froze, listening for any sound from upstairs. Silence. I knelt down to gather the papers, my heart racing. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a business contract. It was a set of architectural renderings for a massive estate in the hills of Westlake. I recognized the style. It was modern, aggressive, and perched on a cliff overlooking the lake. I looked at the title block in the corner of the page. Client. The MS Trust. MS Maren and... Sterling? No, she had called him Thatcher on the phone, but his full name was Sterling Thatcher. She was building a house with him, a house that I hadn't designed, in a life I wasn't invited to. The stupid husband wasn't just being cheated on, he was being erased from the map entirely. The house we were living in now, the one I had restored with my own sweat, was just a stepping stone. I felt a sudden, violent urge to shred the papers, to wake her up and scream until my lungs gave out. But I looked at the USB drive in my hand and the tracker on her car. No, that would be too easy for her. If I broke now, she'd call her high-priced lawyers, cite my unstable behavior, and fast-track the theft of our life. I had to be the artisan. I had to be patient. I had to wait for the exact moment when the feather in the diamond was exposed. I carefully restacked the folders, ensuring every edge was perfectly aligned, just as she liked it. I smoothed the rug and backed out of the room, my eyes never leaving the doorway. I returned to our bedroom, slipping back into the sheets that still smelled of her perfume, a scent that now felt like a chemical burn. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, my mind already beginning to sift through the data I hadn't even read yet. I thought about the architectural plans. They were beautiful, in a cold, sterile way. They lacked the warmth of the home I had built. I realized then that Maren didn't just want a new life. She wanted a trophy. And Thatcher was just the man to give it to her. The white bumper of Maren's car flickered in and out of view through the shimmering heat waves rising off the Austin asphalt, a mechanical rabbit leading a hound that had finally found its teeth. I trailed them at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel, not with the white-knuckled desperation of a broken man, but with the steady, surgical intent of a craftsman preparing for the final cut. Every time Thatcher's laughter crackled through my speakers, a tinny, digitized mockery of my life, it felt like a drop of acid etching the blueprint of my retaliation deeper into my mind. They weren't just driving to lunch. They were driving toward a cliff they couldn't see, and I was the one who had quietly removed the guardrails. When they pulled into the valet circle of a high-end steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where deals are made in whispers and loyalty is bought by the hour, I didn't stop. I circled the block and parked in a crumbling concrete garage 3 blocks away. I sat in the dim light of the stairwell, my laptop balanced on my knees, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. The USB drive Greer gave me was a gold mine, but the pregnancy photo was the mother lode. It changed the geometry of the entire situation. It was no longer just about a business merger or a house in the hills. It was about a legacy built on a foundation of theft. I began to dig into the MS Trust files with a renewed, cold-blooded focus. Maren had been clever, but her arrogance had left a breadcrumb trail that a stupid husband wasn't supposed to find. She had been skimming from her own fund's management fees, diverting capital meant for tech startups into a series of shell companies that eventually circled back to Thatcher's political campaign. It was a classic kickback scheme, laundering investment capital into political influence. If the SEC got a whiff of this, Maren wouldn't just be out of a job. She'd be wearing a different kind of silk, the kind with vertical bars. I felt a strange, detached sense of pride. My wife was a world-class predator, but she had made the mistake of thinking I was her prey. She didn't realize that in nature, some of the most dangerous creatures are the ones that stay perfectly still, blending into the background until it's too late for the hunter to react. I opened a fresh encrypted document and began to compile the restoration ledger, a chronological map of every dollar she had stolen, every lie she had told, and every medical appointment she had attended with Thatcher while I was home, polishing my little rocks. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Maren. "Running late at the office. Big merger meeting. Don't wait up for dinner, honey. Love you." The "love you" felt like a physical slap, a final unnecessary insult to my intelligence. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Greer. "I need a stage," I said, my voice as flat as a sheet of cold steel. "What kind of stage, Holden?" Greer's voice was cautious. He could hear the change in me, the transition from a man seeking information to a man seeking an end game. "The Thatcher campaign gala. It's in 10 days. It's the official launch of the merger and his run for the Senate. Everyone who matters in this city will be in that room. The media, the donors, the board members of Maren's fund. I need to be in the booth, Greer. Not as a guest, as the technician." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Greer's heavy breathing, the wheels turning in his head. "That's a high-wire act, man. If you slip, there's no net. They'll bury you before you can even get to the parking lot." "They already buried me, Greer," I replied, looking at the photo of the pregnancy test on my screen. "They just forgot to check if I was dead first. Can you get me in?" "The security is tight," Greer muttered, "but they use a third-party AV firm for the live stream and the projections. The owner owes me a favor from a job in Dallas. I can get you on the crew as a specialist for the high-res displays, but once the lights go up, you're on your own. That's all I need." The next week was a blur of calculated performance. I became the perfect, invisible husband. I made Maren breakfast, I asked about her stressful meetings, and I even listened as she feigned excitement about a vacation we would definitely take once the merger was over. I watched her stomach, looking for the slight curve that would confirm the lie she was carrying. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, to look at the woman I once worshipped and see only a hollow shell of greed. I spent my nights at the shop, but I wasn't fixing watches. I was building a digital bomb. I formatted the data from the printer cache into a sleek, professional presentation. I synced the audio recordings from the car with the financial spreadsheets. I even included the architectural renderings for the Westlake estate. I titled the file, "The Price of a Brighter Future." Maren was so preoccupied with her clean break that she didn't notice the way I looked at her. She didn't notice that I had quietly moved my personal jewelry collection, the pieces that actually belonged to me, into a private safety deposit box. She didn't notice that I had stopped wearing my wedding ring, claiming it was causing a rash from the jewelry cleaning chemicals. She saw only what she wanted to see, a man too slow to keep up with her meteoric rise. The night of the gala arrived with a humid, heavy heat that felt like a storm was brewing over the hill country. Maren was a vision in a deep emerald gown, her diamonds, pieces I had hand-selected for her, sparkling under the foyer lights. She looked like the queen of the world. "You look tired, Holden," she said, adjusting my tie with a patronizing touch. "Maybe you should just stay home tonight. It's going to be a lot of boring political talk. You'll be miserable." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of porcelain. "It's a big night for you, Maren. I want to be there to see the look on everyone's face when they realize what you've achieved." She patted my cheek, a gesture so dismissive it almost made me break character. "You're a good man, Holden. Simple, but good." She left in a limousine Thatcher had sent for her. I waited 10 minutes, then changed into the black AV Tech Polo Greer had provided. I drove my truck to the back entrance of the Fairmont Hotel, my heartbeat a steady, rhythmic thrum in my ears. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen explosions from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation. I moved through the shadows of the tech booth at the back of the room, my headset on, blending in with the other technicians who were busy checking the levels on the massive LED screens flanking the stage. I saw them from across the room. Maren and Thatcher. They were the center of gravity, a binary star system of corruption. Thatcher was holding a glass of champagne, his other hand resting on the small of Maren's back. They were whispering, laughing, sharing a joke that the rest of the world wasn't in on. "Ready?" Greer's voice crackled in my ear. He was stationed in a van in the parking lot, acting as my remote uplink. "Ready," I whispered. "The presentation is queued," Greer said. "I've bypassed the local server. Once you hit the override on your tablet, the house feed is ours. 5 minutes until the keynote." I watched as Thatcher stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent. The lights dimmed, and the spotlight hit him with a blinding intensity. He looked like the hero the city wanted. He started his speech, a practiced, polished narrative about integrity, transparency, and building a legacy for the next generation. Every word was a lie. I looked at Maren, standing in the front row, her face beaming with a terrifyingly beautiful pride. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully traded a simple man for a king. I took the tablet out of my bag. My thumb hovered over the red override button. This was the moment where the jeweler becomes the demolition expert. I thought about the 2 a.m. phone call. I thought about the ultrasound photo. I thought about the MS trust. Thatcher reached the crescendo of his speech. And tonight, as we celebrate this merger, we celebrate the birth of a new era, not just for this city, but for my family. He looked at Maren and winked. I pressed the button. The massive LED screens behind him didn't show the campaign logo. They didn't show the brighter future montage. Instead, the ballroom was suddenly filled with the sharp, clear audio of a car's interior. "He's too stupid to notice," Maren's voice rang out, amplified by the multi-million-dollar sound system until it shook the very foundations of the room. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. It was a vacuum, a sudden drop in pressure that left everyone gasping for air. On the screens, the first spreadsheet appeared, the MS Trust kickback ledger, with Maren and Thatcher's signatures highlighted in a cold neon red. I watched Thatcher's face from the shadows. The confidence evaporated in a split second. replaced by a gray, sickly pallor. He turned around, staring at the screen as the architectural renderings of their secret estate scrolled by, followed by the photo of the pregnancy test. The room erupted into a cacophony of gasps and camera flashes. Maren turned toward the tech booth, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I turned off my headset, laid the tablet on the console, and walked toward the service exit. I felt a strange, light sensation in my chest, as if I had finally shed a suit of lead armor. As I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped out into the cool Austin night, the first raindrops of the storm began to fall, hitting the hot pavement with a hiss. I walked toward my truck, the sounds of the chaos inside fading behind the thick walls of the hotel. I wasn't the stupid husband anymore. I wasn't the artisan fixing broken things. I was the man who had finally cleared the land so he could start building something real. I got into the truck and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw the blue and red lights of police cruisers already screaming toward the hotel entrance. I turned on the radio, not to a news station but to a simple, instrumental track I used to listen to while working at my bench. I drove toward the outskirts of the city, toward the hills. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the small gray pebble, the uncut diamond. I held it up to the light of a passing street lamp. It was still ugly. It was still raw. But for the first time in 15 years, I could see exactly how I was going to shape it. I pulled over at a lookout point overlooking the lake. The water was dark and turbulent under the lightning, but the air felt clean. I rolled down the window and felt the rain on my face. My phone began to vibrate in the center console. It was Maren. I didn't answer. It vibrated again. And again. I picked it up, but I didn't swipe to talk. I simply held the phone out the window, watching the screen glow with her name one last time before I let it slip from my fingers, watching the light disappear into the black depths of the canyon below. The silence of the canyon was a stark contrast to the wreckage I had just left behind in that ballroom. Below me, the waters of Lake Travis swallowed my old life in a single, dark gulp, the ripples vanishing as quickly as Maren's reputation. For the first time in a decade, my pockets were light, and my chest felt empty of the leaden weight of suspicion. I sat on the tailgate of my truck, the rain soaking through my black tech polo, cooling the skin that had been burning with resentment for months. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man who had successfully performed a controlled demolition on a house of cards. What do you think? Was it cold? Or was it just the interest due on a debt they thought I'd never collect? I want to see your honest takes in the comments. Does the stupid husband go too far? Or is this the only way to survive people like Maren and Sterling? If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were holding all the cards, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting to the part where the dust settles and the new foundation begins. The aftermath was a digital wildfire that no amount of political damage control could extinguish. By the time I reached my small workshop downtown, the local news was already looping the gala glitch, as they called it. But it wasn't a glitch, it was a mirror. The SEC didn't wait for the morning to freeze the assets of the MS Trust. By 3 a.m., Thatcher's campaign headquarters was being raided, and Maren's firm had issued a statement categorically distancing themselves from her unauthorized financial maneuvers. I walked into my studio and didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. I knew every inch of this space by touch. I sat at my bench and picked up a jeweler's saw, the fine, hair-like blade catching the moonlight. I wasn't thinking about the money she tried to steal or the house she wanted to build. I was thinking about the child. That was the one variable I couldn't fix or restore. It was a life built on a lie, a legacy of betrayal. I felt a fleeting moment of pity for that unborn soul, destined to be the collateral damage of two predators' greed. But pity is a luxury for those who haven't been hunted. The legal fallout was swift and clinical. Maren tried to call me from a burner phone 2 days later, her voice trembling, stripped of its corporate silk. She didn't lead with, "I'm sorry." She led with, "How could you ruin us?" "I didn't ruin you, Maren," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "I just stopped pretending I didn't see the cracks. You told Thatcher I was too stupid to notice. I just decided to let you keep believing it until the floor gave way." "We could have settled this quietly," she hissed, the predator still flashing its teeth. "You've destroyed everything. The baby, Thatcher's career, my life." "You destroyed everything the moment you turned our marriage into a merger," I replied. "I'm just the auditor who found the missing balance." "Goodbye, Maren." I hung up and blocked the number. There would be no reconciliation, no tearful apologies at a mediation table. The divorce was settled in record time because Maren had no leverage left. The evidence I handed over to the authorities was so comprehensive that her lawyers advised her to take whatever crumbs I offered just to avoid a longer prison sentence for the embezzlement. I kept the house in Austin, the one I had restored with my own hands, and I sold it a week later. I didn't want to live in a museum of her deceit. I spent the next month traveling through the desert, driving toward the coast with nothing but my tools and the raw, gray diamond. I ended up in a small town in Oregon, a place where the air smells of salt and pine, far away from the polished glass towers of Austin. I opened a new shop, smaller this time, with no sign out front. Just a workbench by a window that looks out over the Pacific. I finally set that raw diamond. I didn't polish it into a perfect, brilliant cut stone. I left it rough, its jagged edges catching the gray light of the coast. I set it into a band of tarnished silver, a piece that looked like it had been pulled from the wreckage of a ship. It wasn't a piece for sale. It was a reminder. Beauty doesn't always have to be perfect. Sometimes it's just the thing that survives the storm. I look at my hands now, and I don't see the artisan who was ignored. I see a man who knows the value of silence. Maren and Thatcher are still tied up in litigation, their brighter future now a series of court dates and mounting legal fees. They are trapped in the very system they tried to manipulate, fighting over the scraps of a kingdom that no longer exists. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls off the ocean and rattles the glass of my studio, I think about that 2 a.m. phone call. I think about the version of me that would have just gone back to sleep, the man who would have spent the rest of his life being stupid for the sake of comfort. I'm glad that man is gone. He was a ghost built on a foundation of sand. I pick up a new piece of gold, heating it until it glows a dull, honest red. The world is full of people who think they can build their lives on the backs of those they deem too simple to understand. They forget that the simplest things are often the hardest to break. As I hammer the metal into shape, the rhythmic clink, clink, clink is the only sound in the room. A steady, patient heartbeat. I'm not building for anyone else anymore. I'm just building. And this time, I'm checking every single weld. I hope this story reminded you that your value isn't defined by how others perceive you, but by what you do when the lights go out. If you enjoyed this journey from betrayal to reclamation, let me know which part of Holden's plan was your favorite. Do you think he should have kept the money, or was the justice enough? I'll be in the comments reading your thoughts. Until the next story, stay sharp and never let them think you aren't paying attention. I set the hammer down and look out at the horizon, where the gray sea meets the gray sky. The tide is coming in, washing away the footprints on the sand, leaving the shore clean and ready for whatever comes next. I reach over and turn off the small LED task light, leaving the room in a peaceful, honest darkness.